have Jan from Sidewalk Labs, and previously at Oscar. We have Neil, founder and CEO of yeeldr. We have Kenn at Vettery. We also have Jordan at CloserIQ. And the format for this event is that we're going to start off with a little bit of a panel. So we're going to have a few questions to kind of do the introduction, set up the stage for the topic. Then each of them are going to have 5 minutes to do a quick presentation to really dive deeper into their topics of choice, and then we're going to have Q&A for you guys to participate as well. Great, well, let's get it started. Then I'd love to start off with a little bit of a round of introductions, if you want to start.
Hi guys, good, sounds good. I can figure this out. Nice to meet everyone. As you heard, I'm currently with Sidewalk Labs. Sidewalk is essentially a company investor and company incubator. We have built a team, marshaled the resources to use technology to make life in cities better. It's a very broad scope. And we're spinning off companies and investing companies, etc. It's alphabet funded. And I joined about 3 months ago. It's a team of 45 people, and I do what I've done kind of throughout my career, which is building. I've kind of had a history of coming to companies when they were usually about 100 people, practically no recruiting infrastructure, culture, or anything, and then having to build that while the company needed to grow pretty rapidly. And I've done that in Berlin and the UK, and I've been in New York for about 2.5 years. Most recently was at Oscar, went from 100 to 450 people. So I've had to think about recruiting a fair bit, and hopefully can share something interesting today.
How you doing? My name is Neil, as we've already figured out. I'm the founder and CEO of yeeldr. Essentially what we do is we've provided a consultative approach to recruiting. We've been in business now for about 4 years. We just recently launched in Portland and Denver, headquartered here in New York, with an office in New Jersey as well. Unlike a traditional third-party agency, what we like to do is, again, provide a consultative approach to recruiting. So we'll actually come on site and we're basically the Jan, if you don't have the Jan. We'll provide infrastructure, we'll develop pipelines, we'll do whatever it takes to help you hire, and we'll also leave you with best practices while we do so. So hopefully I'll be able to help you out as well.
Hi everyone, I'm not Ken, I'm Jordan. We should probably switch to easier. I started CloserIQ about 3 years ago, and we built sales teams for startups. We've got about 200 clients here in New York based, New York focused. And basically, categorically, we built sales and customer success teams leveraging a blend of technology and traditional recruiting. So my background, I started my career in software engineering, and then the inspiration for CloserIQ came when I was actually working with Neil at Gadhok, and I was a sales manager there. I had the same challenges of hiring and performance managing sales reps. And from that experience, started CloserIQ, and now we're a team of 12 people here in New York. And always talking about sales and talking about ways to build teams for startups.
Hey, working? Yes. Cool. Okay. Can't really hear myself. So I'm Ken, currently the director of people at Vettery. What's Vettery? We're a talent marketplace where basically we're putting the power of recruiting into the candidate's hands. So sort of flipping recruiting on its edge, and basically if you're interested in checking out Vettery, you should definitely go to vettery.com and see what we have to offer. It doesn't cost anything to be a part of the company. It won't cost when you hire. So check that out, that little stint there. About myself, I think like all people do, I sort of fell into recruiting. I don't think anyone really like dreams of being in HR when they're a child. Like I definitely want to do that when I grow up, but it's stuck, and that's what I think is super magical about HR. It's that the right types of people tend to fall into it, and then you end up loving it and you stay there. So I think it's super cool to see so many people who are interested in what I love nerding out about every day. I look forward to making this thing happen.
Do we need the mic?
I don't know if we do we need the mic?
Oh, we're recording?
Yeah,
I absolutely want to use the mic.
So yeah, we need the mic.
Well, thanks everyone for the intros. I guess to complete the intros, I'm Anada. I've met a lot of you already, but I'm one of the organizers of the HR Tech Showcase together with Lilia, and we're also the team of Day 100, which is a recruiting platform that basically does predictive analytics for recruiting. And we believe that, or we've seen that hiring for culture is hard. So we're trying to help companies assess soft skills and culture traits up front so they can make the right decisions. So if you want to learn more about that, let's talk later. But great, so I guess to start touching on the topic of performance-based recruiting. I'd love to kind of start off with defining what do we mean about performance-based recruiting, because sometimes it's used as an umbrella term, but where it really originated is Lou Adler's theory about how recruiting should be done properly. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and your own definitions and how you incorporate that within your own recruiting practices.
So as I mentioned, so what's my kind of relationship to the stuff that Lou Adler has produced? Because I had to build so much and often without having context or frameworks, I've started to at some point just dig in and look at what literature is out there, and I found this book, which is Hire With Your Head, I think, which I read through. And there are a number of gems in there, and actually I'll talk about essentially one of them and a little bit about performance profiles and job descriptions, because I think that actually makes a ton of sense, and even though it makes a ton of sense, nobody's using it. I think on a personal note, I think his book is a little bit prescriptive. He's a very old school recruiter. He is a headhunter, and he's been doing this for a really long time. And he's very he's made a very detailed case for one specific model, and I don't think that scales, and I don't think that applies to startups in a lot of ways. But regardless, he's got a couple things to share that are actually really meaningful and have changed the way that I operate, and I think I like to think for the better. So that's how I would think.
Maybe a show of hands, how many have heard of the term before, like Lou Adler's performance-based recruiting? Okay, so some of you, great. Well, I mean, maybe we can also do a little bit of a brief description on what that is. It's basically the idea that a lot of the hiring today is being done on, and it starts with the job descriptions that Neil will touch on, and it continues throughout the recruiting life cycle, is that the recruiters aren't really looking at the right traits, and they're not really looking to measure the performance that will be applied in the job. And his theory or his framework is really based on the fact that you should think of the market having a scarcity of good talent, and his entire approach is much more, I guess, aggressive and active as opposed to a passive sit-back approach to recruiting and retaining the best talent. So that's a little bit of a overall description, but we can also share a link afterwards if you guys are interested in checking that out. But I'd love to hear anyone else's thoughts on this topic as well.
Thank you. So again, there's lots of different things that we can talk about here, and I'll touch up on a specific aspect of reaching out to passive candidates. But I think one thing that you need to keep in mind is recruiting is a numbers game, however you spin it. So the amount of people that you reach out to is what's going to essentially result in a hire. Now, what you're forgetting is that recruiting is also a huge branding play. And some of the best recruiters don't look at recruiting as a numbers game. They look at it as a way to get word of mouth branding, marketing out to a number of people. So the interview process, traditionally, when you think of an interview, you think, I'm sitting here being interviewed by a company and I want this job. But the truth of the matter is, you're actually interviewing that company as well. And so that entire interview process doesn't start on the first phone call or when you walk in the door. It really starts on that first email that goes out to a candidate, because that's essentially what's really going to matter to your audience. If you're going to brand yourself properly, then you're going to want to be very personal, you're going to want to be very creative, really connect with that candidate from that first email. They may never reach back out to you, but they'll have a lasting impression. And that means a lot more to them than being spammed by a template.
My key thoughts here on performance-based recruiting is that, and I agree with Jan, I think some of the unique challenges with startup recruiting is that sometimes performance in particular roles are really hard to assess and define. And thinking more mechanically about what is the right performance that you're managing towards, whether it's a sales rep or whether it's an engineer, can be very challenging because the target oftentimes also changes a lot. So I think when you take a startup mindset of recruiting, it's sort of this iterative process, and you start to incorporate some of the other literature around top rating, who, and I think the best thing you can ask for as a startup recruiting function or team is to make sure there's alignment in your entire team of who you're looking for, how you define success, even if it is just for the short term, and then working and designing a process that is consistent and scalable over time. I'm going to go into a little bit more about how I think for sales, particularly as a vertical, how you can set up a good recruiting process to attract the best talent. But I also think I probably challenge the notion of the scarcity notion of candidates out there, because I do think that in a lot of roles like sales where the requirements are less clear, it's not about knowing a particular programming language or a specific kind of skill set, where it's really about assessing people. The scarcity is less of a constraint. The constraint is really about having an efficient process that aligns well with what your goals are as an organization.
Absolutely. I think a lot of what I would say has already been said. I agree with Jan. I think that you have to think about the way the world in which Lou Adler is writing from is a lot different from the world in which I recruit every day. So that being said, when I think of performance-based recruitment, I think of performance as an HR, as in what exactly do I need this person to be doing and to be achieving once they come into the company. I'm the only person here who really touches a lot of the HR side of the company, so that's what I'll be speaking about today. It's probably why I'm here. So I think that for me, it's really the idea of making sure that everyone cross-functionally is also targeted to understand what this person will be doing 30, 60, 90 days out, a year from now, and how that actually ties into who you need to hire. And so the constant communication between those two teams, I'm going to talk about the value add for having them on the same team in a little bit, but that's kind of where the money is, I think, with performance-based recruitment.
We're going to get good at this.
Yeah, get really good.
Great. Well, those were some really good points. And by the way, I also want to emphasize that we have a really great panel today because we have everyone representing kind of a different viewpoint. We have Jan here who's representing the more the corporate recruiting, and then Neil is corporate recruiting / agency recruiting more, and then Jordan is HR tech, and then Kenn is right at the intersection because he is the director of people in an HR tech company. So we have all the different angles here from all the different viewpoints, so it's really interesting. But I definitely want to dig a bit deeper into this difference between startups versus bigger companies, because I know you guys have worked and seen the operations of different companies. So can you talk a little bit more? Jordan, you already mentioned the iteration that is necessary in smaller startups. But can you touch on some of the key differences that you see and challenges or opportunities in bigger versus smaller companies in terms of sourcing talent?
Do you have a reaction?
Sure, you guys can start too.
It's okay, we'll switch it up.
Yeah, I mean, everyone here has been worked at a startup, and I think for me particularly, it's that when we work with clients, we're always trying to help them develop a better process, right? Because we are vertically focused on just building sales teams, a lot of times our clients come to us requiring some help and advice and guidance on how to even interview salespeople. What does the interview process look like? What kind of questions should I ask? What kind of attributes should I look for? And it's always a struggle because in most cases, if we're dealing with the co-founders or VP of sales, they're extremely busy, and you can talk their ear off all day about how they need to set up a rubric and have do the top rating and make sure they have consistent feedback and make sure they have good sort of cadence in the entire interview process. But the reality is they're a startup and things are going to drop and things are not going to work. So I think one of the biggest things to remember when you're setting up a recruiting process or thinking about what is the right process to implement at a startup is you have to balance the practicality of time constraints with what does the ideal bar look like. And so there's a lot of minimum things you should have. At a minimum, you should know as a team, everyone who's involved in the interview process, what is it that you're looking for, what is this person going to do, and have consistent messaging of the process. The top rating thing is great, but in sales, I actually encourage a lot of our early clients to go with their gut. I know it's kind of contrary to what we tell our later stage clients, but the reality is people succeed at an early stage startup in sales, mostly not because of their skill sets, but because of cultural fit, because of their tenacity, and some of these sort of X factors that you're just not going to get from a lot of theoretical questions. So that's my big thing, is just about startups and corporate, is balancing sort of the idealism of having a very structured process, but being nimble enough to be able to implement something that works, and then just being constantly reiterating. Because you're going to get some hires wrong, and then you go back to your process and say, well, what could have we done? What questions could we have asked? What modules can we have asked them to do? And then you learn from it, and then hopefully you get better and better over time.
Anyone else?
Excellent answer. Very good.
Good.
Great. Well, since you also brought up culture, obviously that's a huge aspect that is getting more and more attention recently. So how early on in the process can you start applying also culture traits to get that talent? Because there's all these different things you're looking for. You're looking for obviously the performance-based traits. You're looking for the soft skills that are relevant to the job, and potentially also for a culture fit. So how do you make sure right up front, or how do you stagger, I guess, checking for each of these skills as it goes without making sure that you're, like with making sure that you're funneling and like filtering down the applicants correctly throughout the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think culture fit is a big topic of discussion these days. I think that one thing I talk about at Vettery all the time is that I never want any of my interviewers to sit across the table from someone and ask the question, is this person a culture fit? What that does is it precludes people from thinking about, does this person add to the team? No, but do they actually fit into the existing team? And I think that is why a lot of tech companies at their early days, unfortunately, weren't the most diverse of companies because they didn't think about how to test for those things objectively. So I want everyone at Vettery to come into the company and to be a culture add, because I think that culture is constantly shifting, it's constantly changing, and I'm under no illusion that I can control culture because I know that I can. So at the end of the day, I want new people to come into the company and be shifting it, and as long as that stays positive, that's where I care about. And so I think the way you contribute to a positive culture is by having things in place with your people operations functions, where people aren't driven by the idea of coming to work for X, Y, and Z reasons because we have an open bar or whatever it might be, but instead they're being taken care of at a fundamental level by knowing that they have great career growth opportunities, there's a trajectory here for them. Those are the big things that people really care about. And when they feel good about that, that's how you create that organic, really good culture. So when do I test for culture? I think that happens organically. I think we have an entire interview on site where people are trained how to test for a culture add. And so basically what we've done is we've figured out the attributes that are contributable, or that the attributes that we like in people, right? And we said, okay, what are the 10 things that make the best people at Vettery really successful here? And how do we map those? And how do we make those actual objective measurements? Because the worst thing about something that's subjective is that I can't measure it, and I hate when I can't measure things. So what I will say is, what I always do is I take the idea of like, when you're, okay, we've all been in a room when we're filling a sales requisition, and the hiring manager says, hey, just so you know, a lot of our top sales performers also happen to be former NCAA Division I athletes. And then you look at them and you're like, okay, that's not gonna help our diversity quota. So really what it comes down to is the idea that you have to recognize that succeeding at sales and succeeding at athletics, the common trait there is that those people are both competitive. And that's what I can test for. I can measure competitiveness. I can figure out if someone's competitive. And the great thing about that is that there's 25 different thousand ways of being competitive. There's exactly one way of being an NCAA Division I athlete. So at the end of the day, I think to control for culture, you're testing for objective things. You're getting rid of subjectivity, and that's how you think about culture, is like culture adds, not culture fits.
I actually want to second and re-emphasize that point you just made. I have major beef with the idea of culture fit. I think it's crap. Because, you know, as anything, as we're assessing people, we need to know what it actually is that we're assessing. And culture that everybody talks about is this weird thing that, you know, you can walk into a place and you're like, oh yeah, I can have a sense of this culture. And it's kind of true, right? Like on a gutsy level, even on a rational, conscious level, we can do that, we can perceive some of those things. But can we actually describe them and operationalize them in a sensible way? I've not seen it done. I right now work in an organization I think is fantastic overall. We have written down, I think, 5 or 6 things that we claim to be our culture. I've never once heard them invoked, referenced in a meeting, in a conversation. And I think that's been my experience all along, every company I've ever been in. Because it's really hard. I think it's really, really hard to figure out what is that, how do these things fit together, etc. So long story short, I think culture is this very amorphous thing that everybody has a perception of and an opinion on, but nobody I've seen can really articulate it well. And if we can't articulate it well, then we can't interview against it. And talking about culture fit and assessing for culture fit, in my mind and what I've seen, not always, but most of the time, is just a way to justify bias. I like this person, I didn't like this person. And so fundamentally, I think I agree with you, Ken, I think I'm very wary of this idea. Like when somebody brings it out in a feedback session or whatever, I'm like, what do you mean? Why are you saying that? If somebody can articulate that, fine. Well, you know, I don't think they're a culture fit because the way that they relate to other people was too soft and they were definitely giving in too much. It's okay, fine, now we're having a conversation about something that's actually going on, versus just a hand wavy. This is not a culture fit. So yeah, that's my take on
I think one of the commonly challenges with culture fit that I've seen is people sort of confuse culture fit with performance fit. Like I would argue that the competition element is more aligned with what it requires you to be successful in your role in sales. To me, culture fit is really simple. It's about, do you want to work with this person as a coworker? And the way we test for it internally is really simple. Is we have a final round, we call it a social interview, and basically we bring the candidate in, bring the entire team in, we either do a lunch, or we do a happy hour, or do a breakfast. And we just talk, we just hang out for an hour, get to know each other, and just see if this person is someone that we want to have on our team, is someone we work alongside with. So that's our form of culture fit, because we do have our culture slogans taped to the wall and all that, but at the end of the day, the best measure of culture fit, I think, is do you enjoy working with this person? And that's completely different from, in my mind, than do you think this person's going to be successful in the role? We do role plays, we do other sort of sales assessments independent of that. And I think one of the big things for companies is that they tend to sort of mix those two concepts together and sort of have culture fit also be an indicator of whether or not they can be successful. So.
I'll respond to that though for a second, and I'll push back a little bit, because if we're declaring do I want to work with this person at the bar, then we're never going to advance our organization. This goes back to I think what Ken was saying. Like that might be fine, right? So we're looking for the 15th team member.
It's just one component, right? It's just
exactly.
It's not a.
But I think to me it's how articulate, how thoughtful are we in what it is that we're trying to assess. Right? I'm looking for the 15th team member. Does everybody else on the team like that person? Because I verified that they know that they can do what I need them to do. Fine, right? I probably want them to get along. But in the same way that if we're hiring the manager for a team, I'm not relying on the team to tell me whether or not they think this person's capable, because I'm trying to upscale that team and upskill that team. So I want the team's input, but I don't want them to make the decision. And so, again, I think, right? For your purposes, you're clearly thoughtful about the way that you're doing it, but I think if we're writing books and we're talking recruiting in general, declaring would you want to work with this person as a general trait that we should hire for, again, I think is crap.
I really open things up.
Come on, let's get a conversation going.
So I agree with you on. I think that really at the end of the day, what it comes down to is the concept that every time that I have seen people walk into a room and say, hey, need to assess for culture, I've seen it done really badly. So what it turns into is you walk into the room, in the first 5 minutes, you both find out that you went to the same school, you both played hockey growing up, whatever it might be, and then you have an automatic connection and you can relate to that person. So the actual answer to the actual question that you're asking is, do I relate to the human sitting across from me? And that's another good hiring metric. And so I think that you end up being in a 35-minute conversation where you talk about hockey, and I have no idea whether or not you'd be good for Vettery. And I don't want that to ever happen. I want people to be good at a fundamental level for the company as a whole. I don't want you to like the person. I want you to feel as if they're good for Vettery.
Yes.
So our challenge when we didn't have this social interview stage was that we hired folks who passed the role plays with flying color, sales assessment with flying color, said all the right things for the cultural slogans, and then they showed up and they were never, and I use this term not in a gross way, but like organ rejection. It's just like the organization just did not want them to be successful because the personality just wasn't like who we were. And in a small organization, a startup particularly, I think that that's the really #1 determinant of success, because you can have a lead player in a role, but if they're supported and people around them want them to be successful, I think that goes. Now, for big corporations, I would still argue that you should do a social test. You just break it up into teams. If you have a sales team of 10 people in a 100-person organization, I think the whole team should meet that person in a social setting. And also, what you're looking for is not really, hey, is this gonna be my best friend? What you're looking for is red flags. Are they doing anything, saying anything that's gonna be just a big impedance for you to be able to have a professional relationship with that person? So that's what we're looking for, and I think it's just one module, and to me, it's the purest form of this notion of culture fit, because when you write down the rules and you try to like assess for each of those things, it's really hard, and the mind doesn't really work that way. I think the mind kind of makes its decisions on a person in a holistic package, and so that's why I think a social interview stage still makes sense as an independent test of, is this someone that you think you can support, whether it's a manager or a peer.
And I don't disagree.
Well, that was fun. So, great. Well, I guess the common thread there is that we need to also have a language around what we're talking about culture, and not just use it as a blanket term, but go a level deeper and be much more thoughtful about it. Great. Well, let's start then getting into the nitty gritty, and let's start off with the presentation. So, first off, we're going to have Jan. He's going to tell us a bit about job descriptions. And then Neil is going to tell us more about how to reach out to passive candidates through really well thought out emails. Then we're just going to go deeper into attracting sales talent. And finally, Ken is going to tie all of this together to long-term people operations. So let's get it started.
So I tried to find the most boring sounding topic possible. I went for job description. I'm going to try to make it somewhat interesting, and I'll rely on participation from the group, especially people in the back rows. So be warned, I worked for a CEO once who said, I'm not leaving the stage before I have at least 2 questions. Good, awesome. So 21st century job descriptions, I'm going to try to keep this concise. What's the purpose of a job description? In my mind, there are 3. Open to suggestions. I need at least 2.
Branding.
Branding's 1, yeah. What else? Yeah, so attracting the right people. Attracting the right people, yeah. What else?
Transparency.
Transparency, in what sense?
Just being able to communicate what you're looking for in a
Yes.
way that the world would understand outside of your business.
Okay, so communicating to the world outside of the company. Good, there's 1 more.
Clarifying the purpose of the role
For whom?
or internally.
Yes. That's how I think about it. Those are in my mind. Definition, that's internal alignment. What do we actually want out of this? Explanation, external alignment, explaining to the world, here's what we want out of this. And then there's the marketing piece or branding piece, right? So it doesn't only have to make sense. People don't only have to understand it, they also have to be excited by it. And we're going to use this quickly as a framework to look at the way that job descriptions are being written, and I'm using the theme, so 1996. I think actually Friends was 1994, but whatever. Here's example A. This is from a job description I found last week. By the way, not a corporate boring GE. Well, they would be angry if I said that. This is not recorded. This is from a tech startup, and I'm obviously not going to reveal their name because it doesn't matter, because we all write job descriptions this way. So I'll just read this out. Partner responsibilities. Partner with key stakeholders, HR business, to understand and help determine short-term talent acquisition needs and long-term strategic goals to meet business objectives. My problem with that is it tells me almost nothing about the job. You cannot look back at the year and say, was Jan successfully responsible for partnering with key stakeholders? Right? So the problem is, it only really ticks that first box. It is a way of talking and thinking in terms of responsibilities comes in my mind from, it's the most straightforward way to carve something out of an org chart. Right? We know like, oh yeah, we have this organization and like here are all the responsibilities that the organization is taking care of. Okay, let's circle this thing, we need to give this. Which is fine, but again, and this is the theme of today, it's not performance oriented, it's bland. It doesn't help us actually make sense of what it is. Here's example B, requirements. 4+ years of recruiting experience focused on supporting the business design and or customer support. You also notice that the language is missing something. Oxford. Teams, I don't know, focused on supporting the business, design and customer support. Anyway, so I have a number of issues with this as well. First off, 4+ years at something doesn't make you good at it, it just means you've been around. And we all know people that either under or overcut this and that they're successful or not successful because of a lot of factors. There might be a correlation with years of experience, but there definitely isn't causation. And I think we're writing this in that way because we want people to self-select, right? And the bad news is the person with 2.5 years that wants a job on my team is still going to apply. And there's a more fundamental problem here, which is we're now writing job descriptions for the people I don't want to apply. And that's, to me, where the big gap is to the 21st century. We're living in a different reality. We should be writing job descriptions for the people that we actually do want to apply. So the big issue here is I don't think it accomplishes anything out of the 3 purposes that we're trying to get at. And so let's look at the 21st century. I've started watching this recently, I think it's cool. I wanted to sneak it in. Luke Cage, Harlan Revenger. Welcome to the 21st century, Lou Adler. This is a quote from him, so it's worth reading the book. If you want to hire superior people, first define superior performance. At the end of the day, we all have jobs to get our shit done. What's that shit? Right? Peter Drucker is a famous management writer. I think he worked at Harvard for a really long time. It's like he's a demigod in the world of management advice. And one of his main things that he says is first think through the assignment. It's very obvious. Let's think about what it actually is that we want out of this. And so we should think about what's really the job. Here's an example for what that can look like. I'll let you read it. We need to hire circa 150 customer service staff before the end of the year. This is part of our annual holiday season ramp up. We need you to accomplish that working together with management and the recruiting team. I made this up. I don't know if it's perfect, but it hopefully should give you a pretty clear sense of what a crazy company is that you're looking at because they have a shit ton of hiring to do in less than 3 weeks. And you're just starting to interview people now. Oops. But it is very clear cut. And we talk about the 3 purposes. I don't know if I've included that in the, yeah. It helps us, it forces the hiring manager to say, what is it that I need that this person to get done? The HR person on our panel will say, oh, amazing, this is also the performance management plan already written. Because if the person can get this done, mission accomplished, well done. It also hopefully does a good job at this, right? You suddenly know what's actually expected of you. And again, there's a lot of detail that you don't have right now, but it's not about responsibilities and sourcing tools, whatever it is, like there's a ton of hiring to do. Okay, let's have that conversation. And I would argue, to the right person, that's going to be attractive. Having that clarity is going to be attractive, and understanding this is the challenge that I need to surmount. Wow, let me do this. Or, no, thank you. That's really too crazy for what I'm trying to do. So, I'll keep it brief. Yeah, we talked about this. The bonus is your performance management plan is already done. Expectations are set, documented, and can be measured against. Because we're talking about outcomes, not general responsibilities. With that, you're ready.
Slides so that we can get through this here. We can open up to questions, which I think might be more valuable. I'm going to talk to you about passive candidates. Right? So, kind of going off of what Jan just talked about, he's discussing an active candidate. This is somebody that's looking for a job. And so to be able to provide them with a proper job description is very crucial. Now, I'm talking about passive candidates. These are people that are most likely happy where they are. They probably already have a job. They're not looking for one. You're going to tap this sleeping giant on the shoulder, and you better be prepared for what's going to happen after that. So what I want to talk about is how to approach these candidates via email or an email. I'll specifically keep it towards engineers, because I know Jordan's going to talk about sales candidates a lot. But just in general, overall, what I'm going to say is going to work for anybody. On the email side, you may want to avoid that for the engineers. They're just piling up over and over again. If you can find a way to find their email address, it's more personal and you'll get more response that way. So a couple things you want to know right off the bat, what's not to do. Don't email blast people. Don't spam people, and don't use templates. So there's many reasons behind that. Originally, I mentioned that recruiting is a numbers game. And what that means is that if you reach out to 1,000 people, maybe 100 will respond, maybe 10 go in process, and maybe you make 1 hire. And if that's your goal, is just to make a hire, you don't care about anything else, then email blast people, spam people, do whatever it takes. But traditionally, when you're working with a small tech company and there's a ton of competition, That's the last thing you want to do because you're going to damage your brand. So the first outreach that you do with anybody needs to be very important, needs to be personalized. So I'm going to break this down into what you really want to do for an email. We'll call it 4 parts. The first part is grabbing their attention, okay? This is going to start obviously with the subject line. It's very, very key. And it's going to also roll into the first few lines of your body. I say that for 2 reasons. One, you might have a very clever subject and it'll force someone to open up the email. But if it's really boring after that, you're going to lose your reader. Just like you would look at the title of a book and then open it up and get bored after page 2, you're throwing that thing aside, right? The other reason that I mention that is because everybody uses their cell phone now, and that's how they check their emails, especially your personal emails. So when I get an email to my cell phone, it pops up on my home screen. It says, from who, here's the subject, here are the first 2 lines. So this is your best chance to really pique someone's interest. So that's very, very important. Now, there's really no formula to writing a good subject, which is what the difficult part about this is. I will tell you to stay away from certain things. Don't use words like new opportunity or hiring or rock star, all-star. These are cliche. They'll immediately be thrown off and never read. So don't say something like, new opportunity, we're hiring a rock star engineer. No one's going to open that email up. What you want to do is really focus on one of 2 things. You can focus on the candidate himself. So whatever research you did to get to that point, whatever, if you were looking through LinkedIn or GitHub or another sourcing tool, you probably gathered a lot of information about this candidate. Use that to your advantage in the subject line. Say something that you learned about them in the actual profile that you found on LinkedIn. This will engage them quickly, and this will lead them to believe that you're not some email blast, you're not spamming them. This isn't just like some email marketing tool. You literally took the time to go through their profile and you found something. And that's not always easy, especially when you're hiring engineers. They tend to be very secretive, and they just have a great education, working for a great company, and you're not sure what to do after that. In that case, what you really want to do is focus on yourself, focus on your company. What sets you aside? Did you guys just raise a new round of funding? Just raised $10 million, Series A, let's talk. Is it your product, right? Are you doing something different that no one else is doing? You're building a different type of platform that no one else is building? Think of something that would connect to the candidate. So if you're a healthcare company and you're building a platform that's going to fight cancer, I'm pretty sure that you're looking for someone coming from a healthcare background. So mention that in the title, right? You're in healthcare, we're going to beat cancer, help us. People they'll respond to that. The other thing that you can possibly do is just talk about the great people that you work with, right? 8 ex-Googlers just joined, are you next? That's intriguing. That makes me wonder, why did 8 Googlers leave an amazing opportunity to join this startup? Let me hear what they have to say. Once you get into that body, the second thing that you want to do is, again, keep that interest, be very interesting in the first few lines, but the next thing you want to do is talk exactly about why am I reaching out to you. Don't jump right into what you're going to be doing. Just say, look, honestly, I noticed that you're in healthcare. I noticed that you've been in healthcare for 5 or 6 years. Really interested to learn more about what you were doing at ZocDoc. I noticed that you're working with these technologies. You're working with Python and JavaScript. We're transitioning into the same type of technology. We really would love to understand the challenges you face from going from a company of 10 to a company of 500, because that's essentially what we want to do. Now you've piqued their interest further, right? Okay, there's some sort of expertise that I have that they want to learn about, right? The next thing you want to do, which is the third part of the email, is after you've really talked about them, this is really going to draw into what Jan was talking about. Talk about the opportunity itself, and do not make it 1996 or 94 Friends-ish. Make it very, very personal, and tell them exactly what the challenges are that you're facing and why you think their expertise will be able to help you. So tell them, what we're doing is this. We're having trouble scaling, and we're having trouble with this distributed system that we're building. We think that someone with your skill set can help us do that. We're looking to use these technologies, okay? you're going to be leading a team of 5 or 6 people and reporting to the CTO, and include that person's information. Most likely your CTO is a pretty impressive person. And so put their LinkedIn profile in your email so someone can click that link and say, whoa, this person was working at Facebook. I want to work with someone like that. The developers really, really want to learn more, and they want to be challenged in their everyday life. And so that's what you're basically providing right there. Once you've got all that information out, you've done step 1, you got their attention, you've done step 2, you've talked about why it's you that I'm reaching out to, thus proving once again that I'm not spam, I'm not just some sort of email, that I'm telling you I've looked through your profile, I've really done the research. Then you talk about the 3rd step, which is a little bit more about what the job is exactly, and then you go for the 4th part, which is my favorite, which is a call to action. And it's risky, but before I even tell you more about this, I want to let you know that reaching out to candidates is not like a one-time thing. Don't reach out to one candidate and then go away. You got to be organized and be able to reach out to them multiple times over the course of a short period of time. 4 to 6 weeks really works the best. I'd say somewhere between 3 and 4 messages in that time span. The reason I say that is because in your initial email, you're giving them a lot of information, all right? And some people, if you scroll more than once on your phone, you've lost that, all right? So going back a second time with a shorter message is another way to almost retrace your steps. So first impressions are very, very important, but this is a way to get a second first impression, okay? Now, going back to the close, call these guys out, especially on the development side. People don't like to be challenged and told that they can't do something. So you might want to say something along the lines of, John, I really love your experience based on what you've been doing. I think you'd be a great asset to the team over here. That being said, if I don't hear from you, I'm going to have to assume that this opportunity is too challenging for you. It's pretty crazy. You're going to get responses. You're going to get good ones and you get bad ones. Bad ones are also a response and another opportunity to sway that back in your favor. So essentially, once you've called this person out, give them time to say, look, I don't think that you're not interested in the opportunity. I think that based on your skill set, you'd be a great addition to the team, right? I think that betting on someone like you is something that we would want to do. So hopefully you're up for taking a chat, and here's the time that you can reach out to me. Put in your times, hopefully they'll get back to you. Name of the game is consistency, patience, pursuing these people as much as possible. That's pretty much it.
My marketing manager put this together. I don't love my photos so much that I put it on every slide. All right, cool. So we'll jump right into it. I know we're a little bit short on time. I'm going to just talk a little bit about sales, because that's all we do. That's our vertical. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to attract sales talent, some of the things you should think about. So entry-level sales talent is really where most scaling sales organizations are built off of. Your SDR today is your AE tomorrow, and so on and so on. And the most important to recognize is the millennial cohort. Everyone knows about this, the challenges of it, but I thought it was interesting that there was a Gallup poll done this year in May, and it said something like 60% of the millennial cohort are open to new opportunities, which is about 15% more than non-millennials. Now, the world is moving towards, especially with platforms and recruiting agencies and the efficiency of connection, the transactional nature of the jobs are going to increase over time, which means whether you know it or not, you're always hiring, you're always retaining talent, and you're always dealing with attrition and plugging the gap. So when it comes to entry-level sales talent, it's a very different type of persona than experienced hires. And so when you connect with the sales talent, in our experience, what's important is imagine that you're 6 months out of school and you've been working at a job and you're thinking about moving, or if you're straight out of school and thinking about taking your first job in a sales role. The things that we care about as folks who are later on in our career, it's very different. It can be very different from what someone cares about 6 months out of school. So the priorities at this level are, they want to connect to the mission. You have to explain and tell a story around what your mission is and what the product is, not so much about what they're going to be doing. Because at the end of the day, all SDRs are going to make a ton of phone calls and a lot of emails. It's going to be like this all day. So that doesn't connect with people. Telling them in a job description the responsibility to make 60 to 100 cold calls a day Sure, if you're taking a filtering approach and saying, I don't want people who are scared of that, that's totally fine. Kudos to you for that strategy. But if you want to attract people, you want to suck people in, so give them an opportunity to learn more about the opportunity, then you have to tell a story. You have to connect with them as to why the mission or the product that you have is something that they can connect with. Most sales talent will pass on an opportunity because they don't understand it. Number two, the training and development piece is huge, and millennials are curious. They want to grow their careers, and they're not so misinformed to think that they're going to step in on day one and want the biggest responsibilities. They want to be coached, they want to be mentored, and they want to learn from people. And they want to know that you have a plan for them. So whether it's your job description or your first interview, it's really important to communicate just what that is and how's that going to work and what's the game plan. Culture, we talked about a little bit. Have culture be a living embodiment of your interview process, like have it be something that they're participating in. Show them the office, introduce them to their prospective coworkers. Get them excited about who they're going to be working with, rather than telling them what culture is on paper. All right, experienced sales talent. I'm trying to do this really fast. This is different. I mean, these are folks who've done a couple of sales jobs. They've probably got burned a couple of times because of the misnomer of on-target earnings and so forth. So they're going to come to you with a lot more curiosity and suspicion around, is this the thing I really want to do again? Do I really want to make the switch? And so the challenges, the questions you have to answer are now going to be very different. The first thing is OT. Hopefully you're at a point in your career as a sales professional that you've done the 40K, 60K thing, now you're really trying to get to that six-figure level. And you want to know, first of all, that is this attainable? So when you explain your OTE, you need to not just give them a number and say, hey, you have an opportunity to make 100K here, but you have to validate it by explaining and breaking it down into pieces as to how you're going to be able to get $100,000 on-target earnings. What are the activities you have to do on a daily, monthly level, and what's the quota, and why do we think that these assumptions or these challenges that we're presenting to you are attainable? So you really have to unravel the OTE and present that to them fairly early on in the conversation. You should expect them to care about that number, and you should expect them to want to know about it. Most of the folks that are experienced also want to have increased their impact and responsibility in the organization. Most likely, fresh out of school or the first couple sales jobs, they were part of a larger organization where they had a very defined role, had a script, had a process, they were handed and trained to do a very specific function. So when they're looking for that new opportunity, what they're looking for is an opportunity to grow, to create, to get a blank piece of paper and to be able to build it from scratch. So talking about impact and responsibility and being specific around the challenges they're going to be helping you solve, as well as some of the examples of initiatives that they're going to be able to run as a salesperson, is going to be really, really interesting for a lot of the candidates. And then career growth. A lot of folks leave their jobs because they don't see a career growth. So if you're in a large transactional sales team and you started with a class of 10 people, there's 5 manager spots in the entire room, you see very clearly a ceiling because everyone's trying to get that one job. So you have to explain to them what the career growth looks like, what it's about, and give them, again, connecting the dots, helping them understand, what does 6 months down the road look like? What does 12 months look like? What does 24 months look like? And that's experienced sales talent. So I'll just end it there, and if you guys have any questions, you can find me.
Okay, so my presentation is about talent acquisition and people operations and how those two things sort of coalesce and go together. I put seamlessly a little question mark after that because nothing in a startup is truly seamless, and I know that. So give a little background about what I do every day. I think that will inform much of my presentation. So what exactly is a director of people? Really what that means is that I direct the function of our people team. So I organize our efforts. The way that my organization is split up, it's split into 2 teams. One side does talent acquisition or recruiting, the other side does people operations, HR. You can think of the left side as getting people to come join us, and the right side is getting people to stay, right? That's really what it comes down to. So when I decided to build a people team, I built all this from scratch. I thought, okay, what are the 3 things I need this team to be in order to make Vettery scale the way that we need it to scale? And I thought, okay, we need to be sophisticated, and our team itself needs to scale as the company scales. Then we need to be efficient, and we also really have to get it right. And so when you're striving for something that's like strategic, efficient, and also you're getting it right, usually it's like choose two. I didn't want to do that. So what I decided to do is I thought strategically about the idea that if I have people working in recruiting and people working in people operations, and their work overlaps to a certain extent, then I know that they're working together to a point, and that's where their money is, right? So people in people operations are deciding what does this person need to do in the role, and then the recruiters are the ones making the job descriptions to relay that to the people, hopefully the candidates who are actively trying to get into Vettery. So vice versa in that situation, if I know that I'm in a situation where people operations are the one driving performance, then I can say, all right, so how does that all formulate? How does that shape into the wider structure of the organization? So I want to kind of back up a little bit and say, this is how I think of people operations and how I think of HR. I think if you understand my definition of HR, this whole thing will make a lot more sense. So really what it comes down to is if you can think about people operations and what is that, that's really like new wave HR. So the way I think about HR is that old school HR said, hey, what we need to do is we need to increase the ROI of all of our employees. Well, guess what? Not trying to fool you, people operations, that's also our goal. It's really to increase the ROI of every employee who works at the company. The main kicker, the big difference here is that old school HR says you add rules, you add regulations, you add strategy, you add procedure in order to control people, because people are very variable. I can't control people, I don't know what they're gonna do, right? So I wanna add rules and make that more process oriented. It turns out that's very 1996. So what it comes down to is you have to start thinking about things as less rules and more about what can I give people, what are the resources that I can give to humans instead of viewing humans as the resources themselves. A lot of startups do this in giving people physical things. I like to give people more meaningful things. And what I mean by meaningful are career ladders, career growth, fostering an inclusive and authentic environment where people can come to work every day, they can be themselves. We know from data that people feel way happier at work, that they do way better work when people can be their true authentic self at work. So how do I go about doing that? That's really hard as it turns out. So what you can do is you can tie all this together with a nice little bow, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but the way that we kind of built in our people operations function into our talent acquisition, I sat down with my co-founders and I said, hey, what are the attributes that we like in people at Vettery? What are the things that really make great people at the company great? And then we said, okay, so how do we test for things? That's really freaking hard. As we talked about earlier, how do you test for things that are actually mostly subjective? And like I said, you flip them, you make them more objective. You say, okay, there's a spurious relationship. The R value is not meaningful between two variables. Put a little statistician hat on, and you say, all right, what's the actual thing that we like in people? What are we actually saying, to Jan's point, when we talk about this thing, like, are they a culture fit? We're actually concerned, like, do they actually work well together, right? That's what we're getting at. So let's test for things that we can test. Interview questions are a little bit tricky, right? You don't want to be too obvious. If you're trying to find someone who's a team player and you ask, hey, do you work well with others? They're going to say yeah. They better say yeah, right? And so you want to be good. You want to have really strategic interview questions. And maybe you say something more like, okay, tell me about a time when you're working on a group project, things didn't go as planned. How did you control for that? How did you shift the focus? How did you change things? Less wordy though, please. What I'll say though is you want to be good, but you don't want to be a Sherlock. You don't want to actually actively try to find people or try to trip people up. No one's comfortable in that situation. I think what ends up happening is you contribute to that us versus them mentality that you often find in recruiting. This is especially damaging, as Neil was talking about, when you're trying to cold source people. Because if you're selling them on an opportunity, they're not looking for a job. They do a favor by coming on site and saying, yeah, I'll talk to you guys, I'll have a chat. And then you drill them, and they're thinking like, what is this? I didn't sign up for this, right? I have a job, I'm happy. You're closing, you're selling, you're not closing. Really amazing. I often talk to HR people who have all these things, everything I've already said, they have it all figured out. They're like, yeah, we know what we want to test for, we know how to test for that. And then somehow they bring people into the company and they stop testing for those same things. Why would you ever come up with a list of things that you want to hire for and then stop testing for those things once people join the company? Guess what? That's now your review cycle, right? Those things that you said that you need people to be good at when you hired them, that's your peer review. That's what people are judging their coworkers on when you do review cycles. If you want to keep people, you have to keep growing them. This is a way of growing people by controlling for those different things and helping people to realize, hey, maybe the authenticity category that we value could be a little higher based on your peer review. What does this look like? If you're familiar with the competency matrix, so if you've ever worked in consulting, you know what this is. But this is the bottom left corner of a competency matrix that I wrote for my recruiting team. So what I said is, these are the 10 things that we found at Vettery that we really like in people that we hire. And what I'm going to do now is I'll flip them and I'll say, all right, so if we like this in you when we hired you, I want to see you growing in all these different categories in order to really feel as if you're going to do a good job. I cut this short because I don't want you guys to know my secret sauce, but if you scale this all the way back to the end, this has every position that's on my team, sourcer, recruiter, recruiting manager, all the way down. So the most entry-level person that I hire, I will still want to be organized. But over time, I can teach them how to be more communicative, how to be a team player, how to be a problem solver, how to show initiative, and how to be a leader, right? Those are the things I can actually grow people on, because hopefully I match all those things myself. We'll see. So really what it comes down to is the idea that you have to have these different things in place to control for performance. One way that we do this is by 30-60-90. So one thing that we think about strategically is we always have this written up before we even open a requisition. So Jan's strategy is to throw that into the job description. My strategy is to at least have it written down somewhere. So what it comes down to is 30 days, first things you're going to accomplish in the role. 60 days, all right, cool, now we've done our second group of things. And 90 days in, well, this is like 3 months, so that's good. So think about these things as like steps, right? So you're going to go throughout 30, 60, and 90-day intervals, and you're going to add things to people's responsibilities, and now we understand at a fundamental level how their performance will actually be viewed vis-a-vis this chart, right? Cool. My creative director told me that if I didn't use at least one slogan that he had made for me, he wouldn't be happy with me. So I threw the slide in at the end, and these were some nice little gadgets that he made for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. That was really great and very specific insights as well. So we are running a bit out of time, so let's take a couple of questions and then hopefully the speakers, some of them at least, might be able to stay up for a bit longer so you can also ask the questions in person afterwards. But let's take a couple of questions. Sure. Do you want
Should I?
to?
Okay. Hi, so I loved all the suggestions, particularly the idea of making the responsibilities really tangible, because I do think clarifying both internally and externally how you're going to measure the performance and what exactly you're looking for. But what are your thoughts on kind of hiring for the future? Because to your points, the responsibilities and things shift and change. So the person that you want to hire to get 150 people in 3 weeks, a year from now, the challenge is going to be different. So how do you balance the needs of today and hiring for that versus what you think you might need a year from now?
Yes, I'm having a few seconds to think.
So actually, that same chart that you saw earlier, if you expand that upward, with the bottom part where I showed you guys, those are non-functional skills. So those are people operation skills that I can test through asking their coworkers if they feel as if like these things are nailing it, if they're nailing it in these areas. If you chart that upward, those are all functional skills. So those are things that you have to be able to do well in order to do the job well. And so basically, as you continue to grow and develop and move into higher level positions, I need more out of you and for different reasons, right? So every one of those functional skills has a KPI attached to it. And it'll say, so for example, my recruiters, they know that what I take a lot of time thinking about strategically is what their KPI I care about a lot, to put it that way, is what their percentages from on-site to offer conversion. I don't want to waste the company's time. So they know that's a huge KPI that I care about a lot. And as they continue to grow as a recruiter, I want to see that become better and better, and they're nailing that more and more. And so to answer your question about how do we actually plan for the future, if I could do that, that would be great. I'd love to know what headcount is a year from now, right? But if I knew how to hire someone for a year from now, I think what you kind of have to do is think strategically. Am I hiring someone who levels up the team? Am I hiring someone that I really do feel could come in and eventually lead this function of the company? And we're a 45-person company, so every person who comes in has to be somebody that will eventually be able to lead the function.
So it's the million-dollar question. I don't know there's the answer. I'll borrow a concept from Donald Rumsfeld. Known unknowns and unknown unknowns. So the things we know we don't know, and the things we don't know that we don't know, right? The things we don't know, take a risk. The things we know, which is the world where we can start to anticipate that somebody we hire as a recruiter today, in a year from now, might have to do more than what they're doing today. It becomes a question of, I think the most practical thing, the most practical two things I would do is I would try to anticipate what will that look like. Can I test that person against it? And the other trait is, what does it take for someone to get from A to B, from here to there? Right? And then you want to test for ability to learn, for wanting to hustle through stuff, for wanting to deeply engage with the stuff that they're working on. Those kind of auxiliary skills that will hopefully allow a person to make the journey, but I don't think, we can't know, it's the future.
Other questions? Sure.
Hi. Could you maybe speak a little bit to implicit bias or non-conscious bias? What are the best practices for mitigating that, and what's the role of technology, perhaps?
Yeah, thanks for bringing technology up here at the Age Tech Showcase after now. Anyone else?
Sure. So what's the role of implicit bias? It's interestingly becoming an ever bigger topic, even as we're talking about police enforcement, startup recruiting, and otherwise. Bias doesn't go away. Right, so we're talking about performance-based hiring. Blue Adler says the most important and shortest course in interviewing is don't judge the candidate in the first 30 minutes. Hold off. The way I think about bias is going to happen. That's kind of the point of unconscious bias. The smartest thing I can do is know that it's going to happen and try to deal with that in a conscious way. I'm just now going through giving foundations interview training in my company, which is something I've iterated on over years and years and years. And I think I'm finally at a point where it hopefully makes sense. And the thing that I'm trying to put into people's minds is use the interview primarily to collect data. There's a lot going on in an interview. You're not really set up so well to draw a ton of conclusions. That doesn't mean you can only be passive. You will have to make judgment calls, and you should. But just beware and be aware of the fact that there's unconscious bias. The role that tech plays in that is a great question. I think it's a deeply rooted psychological thing. I don't know how technology can change that. I think technology can help in the way that we're framing things, in the way that we're providing people context. But I think the biggest role of unconscious bias is in interview situations, and I don't know how technology can help us in that directly.
I think that, I totally agree with Jan. I think biases are inevitable and something that you can manage to, but it's hard to eliminate. I would suggest thinking about your process and setting up a process to try to decrease and minimize the impact of bias. So a couple ideas are triangulation. So basically having a bunch of people develop their own viewpoints on the same candidate. So hopefully not everyone has the same biases. Second one is modularizing your interview process, meaning have everybody assess for one narrow thing as opposed to making an end-to-end decision, so that they get functionally very good at assessing one thing. Maybe that's scrappiness, maybe it's hustle or whatever rubric it is, but have them just look at that. And the last one is quantifying. I do think it's important to score. I am a proponent of top rating and at least the rubrics or approach, because it forces people to choose and look at the numbers and holding them more accountable to not just, oh yeah, it was pretty good. Well, how good was it? Was it a 5? Was it a 3? Was it a 4? And then also makes it easier for you to compute composites. So collecting data, like Jan said, I think is a great fundamental philosophy. And then I think adding some of these different strategies can help you minimize some of the biases.
I agree with everything that's been said. One thing I think is super valuable is acknowledging that bias is a thing as an interview trainer, having that be a part of your interview training. So we talk a lot at Vettery about the ideas of confirmation bias, the halo effect, the Horns effect, implicit bias, and what that all means to us as a company. And I make it a point to tell them that I know I have biases. I know that I definitely write people off if they spell the name with one N in their email outreach. I get very angry about that. So I know that realistically, that's not an expectation I can hold people true to. And it's to show them that they're a really horrible person when it comes to attention to detail, when 99.9% of Kens are named Ken with one N. And likewise, that's an example of a negative bias, but there's also positive biases too to be aware of. And that comes into the idea if you've been in the same sorority, the same fraternity as somebody else, you might end up coming into a conversation from the very beginning before you talk to them on the phone with the idea that this is going to be my candidate, and then everything they say from that point sounds positive when it's probably average, because most phone screens are average. So.
Any more questions?
Yeah, thanks. And maybe to add to that quickly, since I'm also from the technology aspect of this recruiting and bias, I think also something that technology can help with is be able to to give you a more independent, maybe even algorithmic, like strip it down from emotion. And then when you have your interviews and you can compare it to an assessment, the technology can give you in terms of different types of personality traits or different types of culture and values aspects that you're looking for. And then you can compare kind of your gut feelings to that, and sometimes the results can be interesting in that comparison, and it helps you highlight any kind of unconscious bias you might have had in that process. But let's take one last question. Or anything to add?
Ask something outrageous. Come on.
Last chance for the year. Okay, cool. Well, if not, thank you guys so much again for coming. It was great having you here. We hope to see you next year then. And my contact information is on the meetup, so please feel free to reach out with any feedback or questions or comments. Thanks so much again for coming.